I never thought I'd sit down one day and talk like this. But maybe when your heart has been broken too many times, the only thing left is to tell the truth. If you're watching this, don't just see an old woman. See a mother who gave her life to her family. I'm not looking for pity, just a moment of your heart. And if you believe no mother deserves to be forgotten, please subscribe. Maybe it'll make me feel like someone's still listening. It started on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of morning that used to feel safe. I could hear the wind outside and the birds on the porch. The smell of coffee filled the air. My sons always loved the smell of coffee. I had made it the way they liked, just like I had done for years. It's strange how mothers remember every little thing, even when their children forget everything about. I walked to the kitchen that day, still wearing my old robe. My hands were shaking a little. Age does that to you. But my heart was calm, until I heard them talking. Their voices came from the living room. Low, cold, serious. I stopped halfway, holding the coffee pot in my hand. For a moment, I thought maybe they were planning something nice, maybe a surprise. But then I heard one of them say, "She won't understand. We'll just tell her when it's done." My fingers loosened. The coffee pot slipped. It hit the floor, and I didn't even hear the sound clearly, only my heart beating louder than anything else. Both of them looked at me, not like sons looking at their mother, but like strangers caught doing something wrong. I smiled. That's what mothers do when they're scared. They smile. I said softly, "What won't I understand?" They didn't answer. They just looked at each other. One of them finally said, "Mom, please sit down." That's when I knew something was about to change. I sat on the edge of the couch, clutching the corner of my robe, and I waited. And the silence that filled that room, it felt heavier than any noise I've ever heard in my life. I sat down, not because I wanted to, but because they told me to. It felt strange, how two grown men, the same boys who once fought over who would sit in my lap, were now asking me to sit down like a stranger being told to wait for a verdict. The room felt colder than it really was. There was sunlight coming through the curtains, but it looked dull, like the light itself didn't want to be. I kept staring at their faces. Both of them, my sons, the ones I carried for 9 months each, the ones I prayed for every night when they were sick. They couldn't even look me in the eyes. "Mom," one of them started, "you know we love you, right?" I smiled again, that same old, tired smile. "Yes," I whispered. "Of course I know." But deep inside I didn't, because whenever someone starts with, "You know we love you," what follows is usually something that hurts. He sighed, looked down, and then the younger one, the one who used to run to me after every little fight in school, said, "Mom, we've decided it's time you moved out of the house." For a second, I didn't understand the words. They floated in the air, heavy and unreal. Moved out of my house, the house where I raised them, where their first cries echoed, where I buried their father's ashes under the old tree in the yard. I blinked slowly. My lips trembled, but no words came. The coffee on the floor had already dried into dark stains, like marks of something that once mattered but didn't anymore. "I'm sorry, Mom," the elder said quickly. "It's just you'll be more comfortable somewhere else. Somewhere quieter. We'll help you get settled." Settled. Such a gentle word to hide such cruelty. I looked around, at the pictures on the wall. There was one of their birthdays, one of their first day at school, one of us smiling in the snow. Every memory on that wall had my hands in it, my work, my time, my love. And now those same hands were shaking in my lap, empty, unwanted. I wanted to ask why, but the why stuck in my throat like a piece of glass. I couldn't speak, because mothers are taught not to question their children. So I nodded. That's all I did. A small nod that broke a lifetime of silence. They looked relieved. Isn't that something? Your children feeling relief when their mother agrees to disappear quiet. The younger one stood up first. He said he'd start looking for a nice place for me. He used that tone, polite, careful, the way people talk to a customer, not to a mother. And I sat there, hearing my own heartbeat like a drum in an empty hall. The smell of coffee, the ticking clock, the sound of footsteps leaving the room. Each thing around me felt like it was saying goodbye. I didn't cry. Not that day. The tears came later, when I went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed where I had held both of them when they had nightmares, where I had spent nights sewing their uniforms, where I had prayed for their futures. And now I sat there wondering if they had ever prayed for mine. I opened the drawer. Inside were small things, their baby socks, a dried flower, an old note that said, "Love you, Mom." I touched it with trembling fingers. It had been written in a child's handwriting, back when love didn't have conditions. And then, I heard the front door close. They were gone, just like that. And the silence that followed wasn't just in the house. It was inside me. I didn't sleep that night, not a single minute. The clock ticked, the wind moved the curtains, and the whole house breathed around me like a tired old soul. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, the bark of the dog outside. It all reminded me that this place still remembered me, even if my sons didn't. Around 4 in the morning, I got up. The world outside was dark, quiet. I walked barefoot on the cold tiles, my steps slow, careful, as if I was afraid to wake the memories sleeping under them. The air smelled like dust and time. I walked through the hallway. My hand brushed against the wallpaper. I could feel the scratches where they used to race their toy cars, the tiny dents where their shoulders hit the wall when they'd fight and laugh. Each mark was a story, and all those stories were mine. When you raise children, you don't just feed them food. You feed them yourself, piece by piece. You give them your sleep, your youth, your peace. And you do it with a smile because you think one day, when you're old, they'll feed you back with love. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they forget. I stood in front of the kitchen door. It was half open, the same door I used to push with my hip when both my hands were full of breakfast trays. I could almost see myself there, a younger version, hair tied up, apron dirty, shouting, "Come down, the eggs are getting cold." And I smiled. It was a strange, bitter smile, because the echo of that voice, my own voice, still hung in the air. And I realized I had filled this house with my noise. Now it was asking me to leave in silence. I walked to the living room. The coffee stain was still there. No one had cleaned it. That stain looked like me, old, ignored, but still present. I sat down on the couch again, the same place where they told me to move out, and I looked around one last time. The photo frames, the clock, the window, the small crack on the corner of the ceiling, everything was familiar. Everything except the people. I whispered to the room, "I guess it's just us now." And it felt true, because in that moment, the house was the only thing that had stayed loyal to me. When the sun began to rise, I opened the front door. The light came in softly, like it didn't want to hurt. I stepped outside. The cold air hit my face. It was sharp like the truth. I looked at the garden. The tree was still there, the one where I had buried his ashes. I went closer, touched the trunk. The bark was rough but warm. "I'm leaving," I whispered to it, "but not because I want to." The wind moved through the branches like it was answering me, and for the first time I felt him, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as something that lived in the quiet. I stood there for a long time. I thought about every single moment in that house. The birthdays, the laughter, the fights, the smell of soup in winter, the sound of their footsteps running down the hallway. All those pieces of life. And I realized they weren't taking them away from me. Those memories were mine. They could have the house, but not my story. So I turned around, walked back inside, and began packing. Not the furniture, not the dishes, just a few things that matter. The letter my husband wrote me on our 10th anniversary. A picture of me holding both of them when they were toddlers. And that little note, "Love you, Mom." That one I folded carefully and put close to my heart. When I zipped the small suitcase shut, I looked around again. And it hit me, I was leaving everything behind, but it didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like truth, like waking up after a long dream. As I reached the door, I turned the key one last time. It clicked, soft but final. I didn't cry, because tears wouldn't change anything. Instead, I whispered, "Thank you for letting me be their mother." Then I stepped out. The morning was bright now. The street was empty, but it didn't scare me, because somewhere inside me a quiet voice said, "You still have yourself." And maybe that's all a mother really has in the end. The bus stop was only 2 streets away, but it felt like miles. The small suitcase rolled behind me, its wheels making that clicking sound on the sidewalk, the kind of sound that tells everyone she's leaving. I didn't look back, not once, because I knew if I did, my legs would stop, and I didn't have the strength to start again. The morning air was cold. It tasted like change. I passed the bakery where I used to buy cupcakes for their birthdays. It was still there, same smell, same old man standing behind the counter. He looked at me, and for a moment, I thought he recognized me. But he didn't. People forget. Houses forget. Only pain remembers. A yellow bus stopped in front of me. The driver was a young man with tired eyes. He didn't say much. I climbed in, found a seat near the window, and held the suitcase tight between my knees. The engine growled, and the world outside began to move, slowly, like it didn't want to. As the bus rolled down the street, I saw the neighborhood pass by, the school my sons went to, the park where we used to sit on Sundays, the grocery store where I argued about the wrong price of apples. Every corner had my shadow in it, and now all those shadows were staying behind. The city faded into the distance. The bus hummed softly, like a lullaby I didn't ask for. I leaned my head against the window and watched the world blur into colors, gray, brown, blue. I wondered if they were awake yet, if they'd noticed I was gone. Maybe they hadn't. Maybe they never would. I reached into my purse and found a crumpled piece of paper. It was a note from years ago. My older son had written it when he was 8. It said, "Don't be sad, Mommy. I'll always protect." The ink was fading, but the words still cut deep. Because promises don't fade, people do. The bus stopped at a small station in a town I barely remembered. I stepped out, the wind catching my scarf. It smelled of rain and rust. A few people walked by, busy, cold, unaware. And for the first time in my life, I realized I had no one waiting for me. No door to knock on, no arms to fall into. Just me, just this old body, this tired heart, and this small suitcase full of memories. I found a cheap motel nearby. The woman at the desk asked for my ID and smiled politely, the kind of smile that doesn't mean anything. She handed me a key and said, "Room 14. The hallway smelled of old carpet and loneliness. When I opened the door, the room was small. One bed, one chair, one window. That was it. I sat down and placed the suitcase on the bed. For a while I didn't move. The silence was so thick it felt alive. I could hear the hum of the light, the faint footsteps outside, the beating of my own heart, slow, steady, stubborn. I opened the window. Outside, the streetlight flickered. A cat crossed the road, and somewhere far away a train passed. That sound, that long, distant sound, it made me cry. Not loud, just quiet tears like rain dripping from a broken roof. I thought of my husband again. Not his face, not his voice, just the feeling of that calmness, that silent strength he used to carry. He would have said, "Don't let them break," but they already did. Still, I whispered into the dark, "I'm trying." I lay down on the bed. The blanket was rough, the pillow thin, but I closed my eyes anyway. Sleep didn't come easy. It hasn't in years. I kept hearing their voices. My sons, younger, laughing, calling me mom. And then the sound changed, older, colder, sharper, telling me to leave. I turned on my side, pressed the pillow against my chest, and whispered, "I did everything right. I loved you right." The words fell into the dark and disappeared. And somewhere between the sound of that distant train and the ache in my chest, I realized something I never wanted to know. Sometimes being a mother means loving people who stop loving you back. The light came too early. It slid through the thin motel curtains, soft and pale, touching the edge of my face like it was asking, "Are you still here?" For a second, I thought I was back home. The same aching back, the same stiffness in my legs. But then the smell reminded me, this wasn't home. This was a room someone had used before, someone had cried in before, someone had left before. Now it was mine. The air was cold. I sat up slowly, my bones complaining like old friends who'd had enough. On the nightstand was a small lamp, a half-empty glass of water, and my wedding ring. I had taken it off last night without realizing. It sat there, shining faintly in the weak morning light, a small circle of everything that used to matter. I picked it up, turned it in my hand. It was smooth, familiar. I could almost hear his laugh, see the way he looked at me when we were young, that quiet warmth in his eye. He wasn't perfect, but he was kind. And I think that's what I missed the most, kindness. I got up, walked to the sink, and splashed my face with cold water. It didn't wake me up. Nothing really does anymore. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I didn't know. The lines around my mouth had deepened. My eyes looked smaller, tired, as if they'd stopped expecting good things. I whispered to that reflection, "You made it through the night. That's something." My voice cracked at the end, but it still counted. Outside, a truck passed, shaking the window slightly. I drew the curtains and looked out. The street was quiet, a few shops opening, people walking fast, heads down. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go. I had nowhere. That's the hardest part of freedom, when you don't have anyone waiting. I made myself a cup of cheap coffee from the small machine in the corner. It tasted bitter, like regret, but I drank it anyway. I'd spent years swallowing worse. As I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone buzzed. It startled me. I hadn't heard that sound in days. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be one of them. Maybe my son. Maybe a text saying, "Mom, come home." But it wasn't. It was just a message from the bank. "Your payment has been received." Even technology knows how to be cold. I laughed. A small, broken laugh. The kind that hurts your chest more than it helps. Then I looked at the phone again and opened the photo gallery. There they were. My son, smiling in old pictures, standing next to me, hands on my shoulders. I used to think those hands would always hold me. Now they only pushed me away. I scrolled further. My husband's face appeared. That one picture I never deleted. He was sitting by the lake, smiling, sunlight in his eye. I touched the screen, and my fingers trembled. "Do you see me now?" I whispered. "Do you see what they've done?" A knock on the door pulled me back. "Housekeeping," a voice said. I froze. For a second, I didn't know if I should answer. Then I said, "No, thank you." The footsteps faded. Silence again, the kind that fills every corner until it becomes a person. I looked around the room. The suitcase was still on the floor, unopened. My life in one box, clothes, photos, papers. Everything else was gone. I took out a small envelope. Inside were a few bills and one letter. It was a letter I had written but never sent. addressed to my son. It started with, "If one day I disappear, don't look for me. Just remember I was once your mother." I couldn't finish reading it. The words felt heavier now than the night I wrote. I folded it back and put it away. Some truths don't need to be said twice. The clock on the wall ticked loud. It was almost noon. Another day, another silence. I stood by the window and whispered to myself, maybe I'll go to the park today. Maybe I'll see someone who remembers me. But even as I said it, I knew I wouldn't go. The world outside didn't know my name anymore. I sat back down and closed my eye. And for a moment, just a small, fragile moment, I imagined what it would feel like to be held again. Not pitted, not used, just held. Like a person who mattered once. And as that thought faded, I realized something I hadn't said out loud before. It's not the loneliness that kills you. It's the silence of those who should have spoken your name with love. The city felt unfamiliar, though it had always been there. Every street corner, every shop front, every sound, it was the same, yet everything had changed. I stepped out of the motel with a small bag in my hand, and the weight of my life pressed down on my shoulders. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of coffee and wet pavement. I walked slowly, each step hesitant, as if the sidewalks might collapse beneath me. I found myself in a small park a few blocks away. Children's laughter echoed through the empty morning. A mother chased her toddler near the fountain, and I remembered chasing my sons like that once. I remembered the warmth of small hands gripping mine, the trust in their eyes. And then I remembered the way those same hands had shoved me away years later, the betrayal cutting deeper than any wound I had known. I sat on a bench near a blooming cherry tree. The petals fell softly, landing on my coat, my hair, my hands. I touched one, letting it crumble between my fingers. I realized how long it had been since I allowed myself to feel the world like this, quietly, alone, without pretending. A man walked by, carrying a newspaper. He smiled at me politely and nodded. It startled me. Why did a simple nod feel like recognition? Like someone seeing me, truly seeing me for the first time in years. I closed my eyes and let the sunlight touch my face. I remembered every time I had been ignored, every time my pleas went unheard, every time my existence was dismissed. I whispered the names of my sons to myself, not with love, not with anger, just a simple, broken acknowledgement of what was lost. The wind shifted, carrying a scent that reminded me of home. Not the home I had left behind, but the one I had built in my mind, the one where no one betrayed me, where my words mattered, and where kindness existed. I imagined walking into that home, laying down my burdens and being free. A small girl ran past, her hair flying behind her. I laughed quietly, a sound I had forgotten I could make. It echoed through the park, fragile but real. A jogger passed, pausing to wave at me. I waved back. It felt like a small victory, like reclaiming a part of myself I thought was gone forever. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter I had hidden the night before. I unfolded it and read the lines again. "If one day I disappear, don't look for me. Just remember I was once your mother." This time, I whispered the words out loud. The cherry petals danced in the air around me, like they were carrying my voice to the sky. No one heard me. No one needed to. Hours passed. I watched the world move around me while I remained a still point in it. A couple walked by, laughing, holding hands. I allowed myself to smile, but not for them. I smiled for me. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing, wasn't waiting for approval, wasn't shrinking to fit the expectations of others. Then I stood up. The bench was cold, but my body felt warmer. I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Choice. The choice to walk forward, to keep living, to let the silence of betrayal remain in the past, while the future belonged entirely to me. I started walking along the path, past the fountain, past the cherry trees, past the children. Each step felt lighter than the one before. I thought about my son. I thought about the years of pain they had caused. But I didn't let the anger rule me anymore. I let it shape me, but not define me. A bench further down caught my eye. An old man was sitting there, feeding pigeons. He looked up at me and said simply, "Good morning." And for the first time in a long time, I responded, "Good morning." No bitterness, no past, just acknowledgement of the moment. I kept walking, letting the city surround me without fear. I imagined returning to that motel later, but I also imagined moving on. Not running away, not hiding, but living, for the first time truly unapologetic. I knew there would be nights of tears, mornings of doubt, and days that felt heavier than the last. But I also knew that each day I faced, each step I took, was mine. And for the first time, that felt like everything. The sunlight was warm on my face now. The cherry petals had stopped falling. The park had returned to its quiet rhythm, and I had returned to myself. The morning sun stretched across the city skyline as I walked along the familiar streets that now felt foreign and strange, yet inviting. Each step I took was a declaration, a silent promise to myself that I would no longer shrink, no longer hide, and no longer live under the weight of what others had done to me. I thought about the years I had spent in silence, the tears that had soaked my pillow, and the bitter moments where my voice was ignored, my presence dismissed, and my worth questioned. For decades, I had poured love into a home that had never returned it, into children who had turned away, into sacrifices that had been unnoticed. And yet here I was, alive, breathing, and finally acknowledging the power of my own existence. Every memory replayed itself in vivid detail. The evenings when my sons had raised their voices at me for no reason, the long nights where I waited for them to return home with dread instead of joy, the countless times I had been forced to endure the sting of disappointment from the very people I had nurtured. I had been their mother, their caretaker, their silent support, yet they had never truly seen me. And still, I walked on, letting the bitterness fall away like the cherry petals in the park from yesterday. I found a quiet cafe along a street I had once known well. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and for the first time in years I didn't hesitate. I ordered a simple coffee, black, no sugar, a reflection of how I wanted my life now, unadorned, raw, and honest. I sat by the window watching the city pulse with life, strangers passing by, unaware of the history I carried with. As I sipped my coffee, I allowed myself to feel gratitude. Gratitude for the moments I had survived, for the strength I had unknowingly built within, for the courage that had brought me here. And then I began to write, not letters to anyone, not complaints or confessions, but words for myself, words that I would carry forward as a testament to resilience. I survived, I wrote. I endured. I felt pain, betrayal, and neglect, but I am still me. Hours passed, yet I remained in that chair, watching, observing, and reflecting. The world moved around me, a blend of laughter, commotion, and quiet moments of beauty. And I realized that while I could not change the past, I could shape the way I experienced every day from now on. I thought about the house I had once lived in, the one that had been my sanctuary and my prison all at once. I remembered the nights I had laid awake listening to my sons argue, the slamming doors, the whispers that cut deeper than knives. And yet, the memories no longer made me tremble. They were part of me, but they would not define me. Evening approached, and the city lights flickered to light. I walked back to the park, the same one where I had spent hours yesterday, allowing the cherry petals to fall around me like a soft reminder that life continues, regardless of our pain. I sat on the same bench, feeling the cool air against my skin, and closed my eyes. I am enough, I whispered to myself. I am worthy of peace. I am worthy of love. I am worthy of living fully. The wind rustled the trees, and for a moment, it felt like the universe was listening. A young couple walked past, holding hands, smiling carefully. A pang of memory hit me. The days I had held hands with my children, the innocence and trust one had once known. And yet, instead of sadness, I felt a gentle warmth. The past would always be there, but it no longer had control over my heart. Night fell, and the city grew quiet. I returned to my modest motel room, unpacking my bag and placing the few personal belongings I had brought in order. Each item, each photograph, each memory held purpose, but none weighed me down. I could breathe. I could live. I could finally be free. I picked up the journal I had begun in the cafe and wrote the last lines for today. Tomorrow is mine. The days ahead are mine. The pain of yesterday belongs to yesterday, and I am stepping forward into the life I choose. A soft knock came at the door, nothing unexpected, just the sound of someone checking in or a neighbor passing. Yet I smiled, feeling the small joys of normalcy for the first time in years. The little moments, the ordinary sounds, the gentle rhythms of life, they were mine to claim now. I realized then that freedom wasn't about grand gestures. It wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about reclaiming my time, my choices, and my peace. The years I had lost were scars, yes, but they were also maps, guiding me to this very moment of self-possession. And so, I lay down on the bed, the soft sheets a comfort to my tired body. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders with every breath. I had survived betrayal, neglect, and hurt, but I had also survived myself, my doubts, my fears, my willingness to forgive. And now, in the quiet of this evening, I allowed myself to simply exist, fully, honestly, and beautifully. As the night deepened, I whispered one last thought to the stars outside my window. I am ready. I am free. I am me. And with that, I drifted into sleep, a sleep without fear, without regret, without longing, a sleep that was mine, completely mine. If my story touched your heart, stay with me. There are more stories, real ones just like this. So don't forget to subscribe. I'd love to have you here next time.